was something that most of us didn't feel was particularly well received across our communities, and we certainly learned otherwise. Through the last 3 years, we definitely learned that people really like to be able to access our educational programming via distance and virtually and so forth. And so this is happening much more than perhaps it used to. And most of our folk are trying to find a bit of a hybrid approach where they teach some in person, but other things are delivered virtually. I have a point, which is that if you're teaching virtually, just as we're doing today, we strongly encourage you to ask a colleague to partner with you as you teach, being able to monitor the chat and make sure that things are working behind the scenes. You know, if there's any issues, it's difficult to be the primary teacher or instructor and then manage the technology as well. Some folk are quite skilled at it, no worries, no problem, but our advocacy is just a trick of the trade, however you want to think about it, when you're thinking about being an effective teacher, is to ask a colleague to join with you, you know, if they're available. So something to think about, particularly as you're looking for this. And if you're going to use polls and all of those things, it's nice to have somebody to run that behind the scenes. Well, let's get rolling. Just to underscore, as the program and development a program and organizational development unit, you know, one of our primary focuses is to help to onboard our newer faculty as they come in. We also have the opportunity for those that perhaps have worked longer for the organization by topic of interest, might hop in periodically and so forth. So we recognize that there's folks that are interested in learning, you know, a particular topic and so forth. So with that, let's move ahead. That's who's joined us today. And I'm going to find my, this is, okay, now see, I practiced earlier, the little, there it goes. If it ever disappears on you, just click off and then the little arrow advance will come on if you're doing that. So thanks to Deb, we know our new folks that have joined and reconnected with some we met last month. So hey to everyone again, really happy to have you join us in this series that we'll put together. All of this is about helping you to be better grounded and get your footing as a newer faculty member within the organization. There's so much to learn and so much to become acquainted with. So whatever we can do to help you along the way is what our goal is. Further, though, there are very targeted expectations of faculty members, whether you are tenure track or professional track. In our professional track, there's the opportunity to advance through that, to promote through that system. And of course, if you're on tenure track, then there's a mandatory review that's coming at us at the 5-year mark. With that said, there's some pieces that we want to make sure that we underscore and we make that we're confident that our folks have had the opportunity to hear about and to incorporate into their approach in their extension programming planning as well as delivery, which of course evolves to the teaching piece. So that's what these series are about. So you'll hear anecdotal things coupled with theory, coupled with the practicums and some various things as we move ourselves along. Today, as we move through these next slides, one thing we're going to do is recenter on last month. We've had some folks join that weren't with us when we were together last month, so we're just going to touch a couple of slides on things that we heard about then, and then you'll hear some others intermingled through the slide set. But our dominant focus today is really about being an effective teacher, how to be an effective teacher as an extension educator. As we know, that might be different approaches than a classroom teacher that many are familiar with through the school system and so forth. We have such a variety of different folk that come to our programs, where we teach them, where we present them, all of the above. So being an effective extension teacher is something that we'll hone in on. Further, though, the idea of a philosophy of teaching philosophy and understanding that and so forth is something that we need to be grounded in, because we are an academic institution. You work in academia, of course, rather than teaching on campus or being a professor on campus. You teach out the majority of folk that are with us across the state in some capacity. So we want to make sure that we're grounded in theory and principles and so forth. We also want to provide time for open discussion. So you'll have some breakout sessions trying to model an ideal setting and distance teaching and learning, where we have an opportunity for folks to hear, then they go out and they discuss it, and hopefully that helps to retain it and so forth. So you'll break out with some of your colleagues here within your cohort of newer faculty that have joined. And then we have some advantage. We have some folks that have hopped in that maybe have worked for the organization a bit longer, and so they certainly have a wealth of wisdom that they could interject to those gatherings as well. So that's what we'll be doing today. So every time I move my mouse off the screen, the little advancer goes away. Okay, so let's refresh a little bit about what we talked about last month. One of the things that we wanted to ground ourselves on was, what does it mean to be a faculty member with Extension? So we really drew on some of our taglines, for lack of a better term. These are elevator speeches, for lack of a better analogy and so forth. Things that really help people to understand what Extension does, and then by connection, what your role is. So taking the university to the people, we talked about that last month. So that's what we do. Rather than just teaching on campus, we take all the research that's done on campus through all of our different departments in our college, the College of Agricultural and Natural Resources, and we extend that out across our state. We extend the university. So taking the university to the people. So, you know, it's a unique role that you have. And so there, I'm sure, are folk, especially if you're, you know, at one of our more westernmost or easternmost counties and so forth, very far removed from the university setting, there may be people that don't totally understand what it is that you do and so forth. So the opportunities that you have to draw attention to furthering themselves educationally and packaging things rather that demonstrate the connectedness as a university faculty member and their opportunity to attend classes that are part of their community and so forth and where they're delivered. That's something to really hone in on. So being an effective teacher and having a philosophy of teaching also comes with understanding that folks, they're excited to receive this education. Many of them would not otherwise have an opportunity to access an academic institution and so forth. So it's a very important thing to drill into ourselves. One, your important role, but then two, the significance of the constituents that you work with and how they view you and so forth. Solutions in your community, that's another part. So one of the things we pride ourselves on is that what we try to avoid is, we're here from the government, we're here to help, you know, that type of an approach of, we're going to tell you what you need and we're going to set this up. But rather, in Extension, we hear from the communities. What are the issues? What are the concerns that our communities have? And then you all, as faculty members, design a program, or you draw on a program, or you either develop curriculum, or you adopt curriculum, or you adapt curriculum, or whatever it is to try to address that. So solutions in that community. The community works with us for solutions that are local. So your teaching philosophy and your being an effective teacher, I find, is influenced by that, because again, you need to hear from your folk. What is it that their needs are? And let's meet them at their level and what is beneficial and helpful. And all of that, though, has to be underscored. I say underscored, but then umbrellaed under, as a university-based program extension department. Our role is also, though, to align ourselves with the initiatives of our broader college. We have some influence of expectations from the federal government and all of those types of things, and then what Extension's focus is, and then all of that has to align with local needs. And so it's a bit complex, but one of the things is that we're trying to meet people where they are and align all those things with solutions in their community. So that helps us to be a more effective teacher if we both value and appreciate that. Strengthening families and serving communities. Again, that's really what we're about. We're trying to build, oh my gosh, economic development comes from a variety of scales. But if you work in agriculture, as an example, and you're working with people for point source produce or agricultural commodities, and you work with them to then build a processing area in the community that you live, well, you've just built the economy there by working with those communities. Similarly, those of you that work in nutrition science and so forth, and helping people to stretch food dollars, combined with healthful choices to fill their bodies with, and all of those things, it strengthens our entire communities because we're more healthy, as you well know. And then, some of you mentioned about being in our watershed program, and that whole idea of improving our understanding of how the watershed then influences our estuaries, our bay, all of those types of things. So it strengthens our communities and our families and so forth while serving our communities. And then again, just to underscore local needs and local solutions. So recognizing that, have I underscored that enough? So recognizing that we have this holistic expectation and responsibility that comes from being an academic university faculty member, but also recognizing that we need to couple that with what the local needs are, and what our folks locally are telling us they need. So over the course of our time together in this onboarding series, you'll hear more and more about grounding yourself in that, doing needs assessment, designing programs, building curriculum, all of those types of things. So that all influences you from a perspective of being an effective teacher if you value these particular components, and then you philosophically develop a teaching approach that helps align itself with that. So the other key thing that we talked about last month was just theory of innovation. So if you missed that session, one of the things is part of the program development model of extension is understanding that we're trying to teach many people new approaches, new practices, changes in their approach to daily living, or practices that align with their interests, whether it's environmental, it's production oriented, it's nutrition focused, it's understanding our broader environment, the importance of the forestry program as an example in our state, but coupled with urban forestry. I mean, all of these different things, come together. And of course, sometimes when you're trying to work with people's kids, whether it's through nutrition or 4-H or whatever it happens to be, sometimes it's challenging for people to take in some of the things we're advising and we're counseling around. And so it takes a while for them to adopt that. So that's what the innovation theory is about, no matter what the particular topic and so forth. And so there's so much influence from that. And, if you work in financial management as an example, and you're trying to get people to understand credit or use of credit or readying oneself from a credit score aspect so they can purchase a home and all that, and they have practices that they followed for their whole lives, and getting them to change and so forth is sometimes challenging. All of that is said is that there's theory of innovation. And so in a nutshell, we have people that come to our extension programs that they adopt what we say and what we suggest very early. They immediately start to do that. And then we have folks that are laggards. And so it might take a sequential approach multiple times that they come to hear things from us. So as an extension educator, you can be a more effective teacher if you recognize that just because you say it doesn't mean people will accept it. So recognizing that helps to influence how you layer your information in, how you expose people multiple times to similar information so that they begin to adjust the absorption of that and might begin to practice it in their daily lives. We recognize, though, that there's cultural implications on that. There's folks that might be laggards because they've been raised generationally on a particular approach. Last month, because we have so many folk that work in nutrition and so forth, I use the example of in my own family, my husband is Hispanic. And so in our family, he makes tortillas. He makes them all the time. His mother made them all the time and so forth. And so for us to go in and say, you should eat corn tortillas, not flour tortillas. And so, but as a culture, that's a whole thing. They make them, they prepare them. Many people are there, they're talking, they're updating, they're visiting as a family when all this is happening. So there's cultural implications. That's just a light example, but there's other, as families and so forth, and whether it's production or it's adoption of a practice or whatever it happens to be, there's cultural upbringing that influences that. So be mindful of that as you are continuing to focus on being an effective teacher. I underscored this, but I'll say it again. Local identified needs is another thing. The problem or the situation with this is to be an effective teacher and the philosophy that we take to making sure that we educate the masses. If the thing is, we decide there's a topic we want to teach on, but we really didn't ask the local individuals what they wanted or what they needed, it might not be well received. It's like, we didn't even ask you for that. And so, there's things that are important about that. And so that influences how early people adopt what it is that we're trying to teach and the practice that we're trying to convey. And of course, all of that is research backed. And so sometimes it's not well received. We have new information that doesn't dovetail in well with what people know at their current time. And so we just advised last month about the significance and importance of investing time in aligning with community members that are of influence, individuals. We call them sometimes king makers or queen makers, to use an anecdotal term. They're individuals that are very influential in the community. And if you can connect with them and help them to advise and counsel with you about the needs of the community and so forth, then they'll be a strong advocate for you. And further, if they're ones that adopt the practice that you're suggesting, they can have tremendous influence over the community that you're trying to work with. So from a philosophy of teaching, be mindful that you need to recognize and identify these people and the significance of them almost endorsing the practice that you're bringing to the table, particularly if it goes against cultural norms, if it goes against practices that are generational and so forth. That's very significant and important for you to bring to the table. So that's just a little bit of a remind us of where we were last month. Damn, this little arrow keeps disappearing. So another thing you'll hear about today, I did want to underscore, is we're kind of transitioning away from a few things we spoke about last month. But one of the things that we focused on, Deb really underscored the significance of our institutional review board expectation and requirement, those trainings and so forth. Dacia now will work very closely with you all on that as you prepare those. There's some training associated with it. Further, the CITI or CITI, however you want to enunciate it, training. And so those are required trainings as part of being a university faculty member. And just briefly, we'll touch on institutional review board. Regretfully, we have horrific examples of human subject review, humans that were treated very terribly in this nation in the name of research, exposed to horrific illnesses without their knowledge, and then studied. And so this idea that from an academic institution, there are people that they don't trust us because generationally, their folk may have been treated terribly. And so that continues forward. And so we always want to make certain that we are following research protocols that are aligned with the best humane approach to our research. Now, our reality, quite frankly, is a majority of we're not probing anyone's brain, we're not drawing blood, so there's some opportunities often to ask for an expedited process and just a number of things. But if you're in the youth program, that's not allowed because they're minors. And so you need to learn about this. And what we also need to understand to be an effective teacher in extension and to understand from a philosophical aspect how we need to approach things is that there are folk that unfortunately were treated terribly in our nation over decades in the name of research, and then further that alignment with an academic institution. So IRB, Institutional Review Board, is a governance group that oversees all of the research that all of us do. And so there's some practices and protocols that we must understand and that we have to follow to make certain that we are following protocol that's required. And then the same thing, many of you, if you seek out grants eventually and so forth, or when you do, there'll be an expectation of the CITI training as well. And so you'll have to document that. You have to provide that certificate. So we just have everyone do it right away. So here's a new topic, though, to underscore that you'll learn more about today, and that's teaching effectiveness. As faculty members, everyone is expected to collect teaching effectiveness ratings from their audiences throughout the year. So toward the end of this session, we'll touch on that. And so we want to make sure that there's no misunderstanding. As a faculty member, you an IRB training, you need to have done your CITI training, and then teaching effectiveness every single year. All of us, including me, have to submit our teaching effectiveness rating forms and so forth. So you have to build that into your programmatic plan. So being an effective teacher also means that you're asking your audience, are you getting what you need from me? How might I improve myself? And that's what teaching effectiveness, while there's some check mark things that we all have to do, it's also about improving ourselves as a teacher. So we'll hear more about that. So let's hop on in more into the dominant topic. We've underscored about extending the university to the people. So the reason I keep putting that up there is that from a teaching philosophy perspective and being an effective teacher, I'm hopeful that you completely align yourself with the point of pride that I'm hopeful you feel in working for a major land-grant university, a top-tier university, and you're a faculty member with a top-tier university. And as such, that's a piece that I hope it influences the rigor with which you bring forward your teaching and the effectiveness with which you present that information and so forth, because you are extending that university to the people. Many folks would never have a chance to have an academic or university experience if it weren't for you working where you work and the things that you do with them. So let's talk a bit about theory of learning. So I want to pause just a second. So for many of us, we probably came into this work because we like people. We like to interact with them. We don't mind standing up in front of a group. We can speak in public. We can engage in public. We chit chat more easily. We're people. And so that lends itself, quite frankly, to often being a more effective teacher because you're personable. You come across, as people say, they don't care what you know until they know you care. They don't care what you know until they know you care. So often as individuals, we relate well to people, and you're in your community and they develop trust for you and so forth. So that in and of itself often lends itself to being pretty good at teaching and engaging with people and so forth, and we celebrate that. With that said, we also come into often these jobs working in an extension. Some folk may come more from a bench science background. They come from a research lab and so forth. And so that connectedness may not be at the same level. Like I would be a horrible bench science researcher. I feel good about this today. I feel good about talking to people, but there are folk that are much better than me at bench science research. They may not be as comfortable in teaching. So we recognize those two perspectives. In extension, often we're more people. That tends to be what happens and so forth. With that said, sometimes we come from backgrounds, though, that it might not have been in core education. Some of us come through literally the College of Education, and you're prepared to be a teacher. That's what your focus is, but others may not. So what we want to do is to come together with understanding the theory of learning to be an effective teacher and to present a really solid philosophy of teaching. It's important that we know the theory that happens to be behind that. So let's kind of hop into that just a bit. So we're going to speak about Maslow's hierarchy of needs first. So one thing I want to give some accolade to Dacia. Dr. Dacia is on here with us today, and as mentioned, joined us last week. But Dr. Randolph has a really solid background in learning theory from an academic perspective and so forth. So we appreciate her and being able to provide some of this detail that we want to hone in on. So regretfully for me, down at the bottom of that this pyramid, it's covered over with my taskbar. But what I will tell you is we're going to get to our main point about being an effective extension teacher. So for most everyone, if you think about a theory and you try to develop a better understanding of where your learners are at, our reality is that there's some basic human needs that have to be met on a daily basis. And so you'll notice at the bottom, there's things such as food, physical safety, shelter, all of those things are a base of people's needs. And so I want you to pause a moment, because think about if you were a classroom teacher and you have children that are coming to your classroom, and the reality is they don't feel safe. Maybe they're homeless. Maybe they don't have a good home environment. Maybe they did not eat that morning. Maybe they didn't eat the night before. There's not food in their home. And so as a teacher, you're trying to ready for learning. But the reality is there are people that may come to us that their basic needs aren't even met yet. And while we're trying to teach them about some new practice, what they're worried about is, I haven't had anything to eat. And secondly, I don't feel safe. I don't have shelter. Those are the things that are consuming them. So it's important for us to know that there are things that are going on in people's worlds that we may not know anything about, but they need these basic needs met to be in an ideal setting for learning. And so depending on your role, some of us, especially those that work in our nutrition program, SNAP-Ed in particular, think of the significant, amazing work that's being done when you're helping families to understand nutritional value and stretching food dollars and preparing healthful meals and all of the things that are done, because you're helping them meet rather this basic need. And many folks that work in our organization kind of are at this level. My primary point in bringing attention to this, though, as an extension teacher, is that if you look at the top, there are often individuals, once these basic needs are met, and then there's some psychological needs, a feeling of accomplishment and so forth. We all like that, don't we? We all want to feel accomplished, like, oh, I did it, I learned it, I know that now, whether it's, fixing the pilot light on the water heater, or whether it's, some new, learning a new software program on the computer, or whatever it happens to be. This feeling of accomplishment is important. And as an extension teacher and being an effective teacher, having a teaching philosophy, understanding that often people are motivated to come to extension programs because they want to fulfill their potential. They want to be creative. They want to learn. Many of the folk that come, some of them are coming to our programs based on the wider need of this pyramid. They're coming because they have some basic needs that they need to meet. Many, though, come to our programs because they want to improve themselves. They want to learn more. And so learning one's audience, being intentional about your the program that you're about to present, and knowing who's coming to the table is extremely important. So that really influences us from being an effective teacher, and further also having a philosophy of teaching. So Debbie, who's joined us today, as an example, she's drawn attention to our Lead Maryland program. And what we celebrate about that is that it's helping create an advocacy, people that might influence policy in the future, all of these individuals that come to us that are really focused on agriculture and the significance of that in our state. And so we're basically working with them to be leaders in that industry on a variety of scales. As those individuals come, quite frankly, many of them may come with a very strong academic background themselves. Maybe they've completed a college degree. Maybe they have a graduate degree. Maybe they've worked in industry. There's so many different things that they may come with. So as Debbie and their team work to plan that program, they may come at that with a mindset of we're having people that are coming to us that may be at a higher level of understanding and comprehension as compared to some of the other areas of the organization where folks are presenting programs where folks may not be as accomplished from an academic perspective. So these are just some polarity to draw attention to. So we have folks that they might need to learn the basics of nutrition, but then other folks that, they themselves have master's degrees. Many of our folks that go through the Master Gardener program, as an example, are well educated, and they come because they want to learn more themselves, but then also they can teach and so forth. So lots of different motivators. So they're up at the top often of this pyramid. Many of them, their basic needs are met. So understanding that is very important, so that as you develop your teaching philosophy and your approach to teaching and so forth, you recognize that those basic needs are something to keep in the back of your mind. So Dacia was kind enough to also draw attention to a few theories that are dominant learning theories. We're going to expand on those: connectionism, constructivism, and then social constructivism as well. So again, as a university faculty member and being higher steeped in our teaching and so forth, it's important that we understand these theories, because that affects how we might conduct ourselves in the learning environment, what we might incorporate into it. If we understand how people learn, if we understand how people receive information, and if we understand how they might adopt that. So let's expand on that for just a bit here. Oh my goodness, I keep losing that advanced button. There we go. So connectionism theory. If you think about that, again, theoretically, this is an academic focus and so forth, but how active learning is acquired when people form associations between specific stimulus and a response. So understanding that theory, and Dacia could probably expand on that quite a bit with this, being that she's well-versed in that. And as we move into the future, this would be perhaps an area that she'll expand on for us. But be mindful that connectionism and that theory is often people, they connect an experience that they've had, whether and that experience that they may have in real time. So whether it's positive or whether it's negative, often people use this, particularly if they're teachers in a classroom setting, to help teach behavioral issues and so forth. So they're trying to teach them something, and if there's some negative consequence to it, people realize, I'm not going to do that anymore because of that experience that they may have. Or if it's a positive experience, then they connect that, and they connect that with learning and the principle that was being taught to them, whatever it happens to be. And so, I use this kind of a little bit of a silly example, but if we're trying to teach people how to train a puppy, as an example, and then we bring a real puppy in, and it's such a, oh, the puppy's cute, I loved this experience, and you're telling them different things about how to train a puppy, that positive experience and interaction and so forth is often then going to help them to learn. They retain it better because of that positive experience. And so with that said, as a teacher, think about that when you're planning extension programs and connecting these really positive, exciting experiences with what you're trying to present. And that connectionism is often going to help people not only to retain that, but to absorb it and to potentially, follow that practice as well. So our next one that we wanted to focus on, and just understanding kind of some theories of learning, is constructivism. And so how people learn, or constructing new ideas through interactions while forming perceptions based on interpretations of their experience. Well, that's a big mouthful, isn't it? But the new information is incorporated into pre-existing knowledge. So this theory of learning, if you understand that constructivism, is that people come with some experiences, and if you can connect learning with the experience that they previously had, then they might build on that. So again, let's use the tortilla making again as an example, and we want to teach them about, that corn tortillas may be the best approach rather than flour. One of the things that we might connect and construct that knowledge base on is there were positive experiences of tortilla making in general. And so building on that positive experience that I might have had as a child or as an individual in a particular culture and so forth, we can recognize that that positive experience was there and then build on that and construct a new mindset. And so they put those two things together. So that's kind of the 30,000-foot view to think about. But for all of us, it's just being mindful that this theory of learning and understanding how people might learn and so forth, and how to connect those two pieces helps you to be a more effective teacher. And then a philosophical approach that you have that we'll kind of bring all together here before we end this conversation today, but that can help you to be a more effective teacher. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of interject is, and this is often an approach that we take, we sequentially build a workshop series. And so be mindful of that. To be an effective teacher and to really help people to absorb and adopt sometimes very complex principles or complex scenarios that we're trying to share with them, it's important to build them sequentially. And so from a constructivism perspective is you expose them to some piece of information and new knowledge, and then the next week you build on that. And so sequentially, you teach them one thing, and then you're going to give them the next part, and then you're going to give them the next part. So it's not a fire hose method where you blow everything you have at them in the first time that you're with them, but you build on that series. So that sometimes becomes complex because in communities, people have to commit to you, don't they? If you're going to do a 6-part workshop series, just as they would enroll in a class on campus where they would go every single week, they need to enroll with you. They need to register, and they need to understand that the holistic approach to whatever it is that you're trying to teach is coming sequentially. And the reason we're doing that is that we want to construct their learning based on a prior experience that they had, whether it was real time before we knew them or whether it was based on exposure that we had. So this is really, really a solid approach that you can take to build on each other and be a very effective teacher. And if you build that into your philosophical approach, we know sometimes we're going to have one-offs. I mean, we're only going to see them once. Maybe I'm going to teach them about how to kill bugs on their roses. I'm only going to see them once, and that's fine. But if there's more complex things that we're learning, or rather we're trying to teach them about, you might want to break that up into the sequential approach. So understanding that theory is important from that perspective. And then there's social influences to constructivism as well. So think about, you build on your prior experiences. So the same example, we might build on the fact that culturally, which, what is the influence of culture, social interactions, and so forth, and how that influences their adoption of the practice that we're trying, to show. So here's our reality. If we're working with a group of folk, and from a constructivism perspective, we're trying to sequentially build their knowledge, okay? And so they learn something new, and then they go back to grandma's house, and they say, guess what I learned? X, Y, and Z associated with tortilla making, and that is not well received by grandma. What happens? Do they revert back to the way that they were doing things? Can they help then teach our elder community or someone else in their family what they learned? All of these types of influences are there. So it can get a little complicated when you think about it, but at the same time, if you just kind of have this base of understanding of what influences might affect the way people absorb the information that we're presenting, you'll be a more effective teacher, because it helps you to design your presentation so that you're mindful of that. It might take multiple exposures. It might take repetition. I use the term often of layering. You're going to layer this information in. So to be an effective extension teacher, be mindful of that. And sometimes people, they're going to get it just like that. They will get it the first time you tell them. Others, not so much. It's going to take them a bit longer. And so it's a challenge, isn't it, for us as extension teachers to have in an audience people that might get it the first time we say it, and others that it might take them 6 times of us telling them. And so the person that got it the first time you said it, what happens when they start to get bored after you said it 3 times? How do you manage that and so forth? How do you ready that, etc.? So it's a piece that you have to be mindful of. So, that's an element that we wanted to just underscore. So from being an effective teacher perspective, we did want to make certain that, we understand from a theory of learning perspective, the study of how people learn, it's evolved from a primary focus on cognition. It's in a controlled environment. It's in a lab setting. It's in a classroom setting, however you want to think about it, to now how people interact in social settings. So, I'll pause a moment to say I've had the great fortune to travel around the world. I've been to 54 countries, and some of those have been in professional opportunities and so forth. It's very curious to me to travel to some of the countries around the world where I observed that rote memorization is the approach that's taken. It's a professor says it, I call it say it, regurgitate. They say it to him, they say it back. They say it to him, they say it back. And that's the approach that's taken, and that's what they know, and that's what they do. And so there's less of an approach of interacting all of those things with social and cultural influences and so forth. Further, that we'll learn more about is what else can we interject into that learning setting to help people to retain that information. We'll learn more about that in a second. So the reason I speak to that is being mindful that, there's this kind of historical approach of this cognitive only focus. But what we know now is that these social interactions, cultural implications, all of those things influence that. And so even being mindful of that, what we need to recognize is that we may have folk, especially if they're residents of Maryland, but perhaps they are within our immigrant community, and so they may come with a different approach that they've been raised on of learning compared to many of our youth that evolved through a U.S.-based educational system and so forth. Again, no criticism intended to anyone around the world. It's just being mindful that we're going to have different folk that come to us with different levels of approach and so forth. So that theory and understanding of learning and so forth is very important for us to come to the table with. Oh my goodness, I'm going to take a drink of water and take a breath. So again, under theory of learning, being an effective teacher, having a teaching philosophy, the study of learning in real world settings, rather, is another thing to better understand. It's really based on an individual's way of learning, again, to underscore cultural influences, which is informal learning, coupled with classroom education, formal learning. Those two big things are something that we need to fully understand to be an effective extension teacher. And as we philosophically think about how we might present information, we need to be mindful of that. So I want to flash forward a little bit for some of you. So there will be a time, whether you are a professional track faculty member or whether you are a tenure track faculty member, there will be a time that will come where you'll be asked for your teaching philosophy, and that's often associated with opportunities for promotion. So if you're on professional track and you're going to move up to the next level, and so you present a packet of information. And one of the things that's often included in that is, what is your teaching philosophy? If you're a tenure track faculty member, you'll present a teaching portfolio that's quite broad. And one of the sections in there is your teaching philosophy. They're going to ask you for that. They're also going to ask you for a personal statement. And so incorporating how you approach your programmatic development for constituents, wherever you happen to work, whether it's the state level or whether it's the county level or in a city or whatever it happens to be. Further, they're going to ask you for your teaching philosophy. So just be mindful that, there will be a point where you need to be able to articulate what your philosophy of teaching is. Debbie raised this earlier. She's interested in promoting in her professional track system. And so being able to articulate that is something that we all need to come together on. And I'm about to share mine with you and how it's influenced and so forth. The reason I also put annual faculty achievement report, right now we are hot in the middle of that, aren't we? If you just started a couple of weeks ago or last month or whatever, maybe not yet, but each year we have to report our accomplishments into the university system via workflow. And so that really builds a bit of a curriculum vitae over the course of time. It's all the things that we did this last year. The reason I draw attention to that is there's a box at the bottom. Look at me drawing the box for you. There's a box at the bottom of that where it asks for your personal statement. Often incorporated as part of that is your teaching philosophy. So just another heads up, you're going to be asked for that. So I just wanted to flash forward. So let's talk about mine a little bit. My teaching philosophy. Also, talk with your mentor about this. What is their team? They'll have a statement. They have to. They have to have one because it's been asked for. But I am very much influenced by my experience in 4-H youth development over the majority of my career. That influences my my teaching philosophy for adults as well. So this literally is my statement from my teaching statement. So I wanted to speak to this. But, you know, 4-H has a 110-year history of success. And the basic premise of 4-H is learn by doing. It's taking an experiential approach. We're going to expand on that here in a bit. Often our youth are presented with a problem or a situation, but rather than being told how to solve it, we give them the problem. We say, now figure this out. And then we process what they did. And then we apply that to their daily lives. Do, reflect, apply. And so that's the philosophy that I take. It works with adult audiences as well. So if you're going to hop up, you know, teach somebody some new, let's say it's a gardening practice, or it's a turf grass management practice or something, a way to help them to learn is to, you walk out and you know, there's chinch bugs there and they've eaten someone's lawn up. Instead of saying, these are chinch bugs and they ate the lawn up, you start the program by saying, what do you think's going on here? They start to dig around in it and they start to see, oh my God, there's a bug there. What is that bug? What's happening with that? They start to talk about it and discuss it and what might be happening and so forth. And then you backfill in by coming in with, you know, you kind of process it. You reflect on what they saw and then you begin to interject the knowledge. This is what this was and so forth. And then how might that works with adults too. So my teaching philosophy is very much focused on do, reflect, apply. And others may have different perspectives. Whatever it happens to be, then you'll need to come up with that. So that's, I did want to underscore about being an effective, you'll note that I've italicized this, extension teacher. It really defines learning as a process that leads to change. And that's what we do. We're change agents. We're change agents. It might take some people longer than others. They may be laggards. We have some that are in an innovation cycle, they're early adopters. Regardless, ultimately, we're hoping people will accept the education we're presenting and it will lead to some change, an outcome, a long-term impact, and so forth. And so that learning process leads to change, which occurs as a result of their experience. It increases the potential for improved performance and future learning. So experiential is so important. That's why we do in Extension, we do result demonstrations. We do not just field-based result demonstrations, but we also do demonstrations as we're teaching it. We often call them method demonstrations. As we're speaking about it, we're doing it in front of them. So if I was going to teach someone to knit, and I'm talking all about the physics associated with knitting, I'm knitting in front of them. So they're seeing it as well. And so that experience also, and then we're going to give them kneading needles and some yarn, kneading, I still can't say that. I'm just going to keep moving, but needles, there we go. Knitting needles and some yarn. And so they're going to practice as we're doing it. Having that experience, they're going to retain that, how to do a loop or whatever it is that you do in knitting. So that's something for you to consider and always be mindful of. So let's continue to hop on. I mentioned this, do, reflect, apply. It's experiential process. There's a model. I want to invent one of these and be renowned and famous. So long after I've left this earth, people will remember me for the model that I developed. Well, so far that hasn't happened. But the experiential learning model, although it's often affiliated with youth programming, youth teaching, and so forth, it certainly can be align with adult audiences as well. So do, reflect, apply the experiential learning model. To be an effective extension teacher, this is a very effective approach that you might want to draw on and to learn with. So it's not the same as just going into a classroom and lecturing for an hour and then just leaving. People are sitting out in the audience staring at you. It's a very different approach, but one that we've certainly had tremendous success with over the course of years. So you'll get this PowerPoint shared with you so you can go back, because I want to get to some other content. But, again, learning experiences are designed with repetition for longevity, deeper thought. So there's some indicators of learning. This, again, comes from more of a youth-focused audience, but it's very applicable to adults as well, because over the course of time, based on your teaching, you want to know, did they learn this? Are they really doing it? Well, there's some indicators that we can look at to see. One is, their reasoning skills, motivation to change the way that they, treat their lawn, or how they, let their let their sump pump run off into the storm drain, whether they, did they change some practice, or did they change their diet or their approach to cooking, or, their understanding of our the tree density and so forth in urban communities and the effect that may have. So therefore, they're more sensitive to it. All of these types of things are very important. So scooching along, there's something that to really focus on, and this is as an extension teacher that we need to be mindful of. If you hear it, typically people will retain about 5%. Y'all, this is a little shocking, isn't it? Because how do most college classroom instructors teach? All they do is lecture, and only 5% of it more likely is going to be retained. And yet that is the typical approach. So where you see really good teachers is where they begin to incorporate practical learning with it, an experiential process. And that's why labs are so important, isn't it? Anyway, so be mindful of this. To be an effective teacher, and your philosophical approach that you might want to recognize is that for you to just say it to someone, they're more likely not going to absorb it very much. If they read it, that's where it begins to increase. But the biggest retention, application, and change in knowledge, change in skill is going to come if you incorporate demonstrations, group discussion, practice in itself, and even further, if you assign them to teach others. That's a flip the classroom approach that you can take. So if you're teaching 30 people how to take care of their lawn, you can flip the classroom and say, teach this next session, and here's the topic. Well, they have to go research it. They have to prepare. They're going to come in and they're going to teach others. They're going to retain every bit of that knowledge because they had to teach others about it. So that's an important strategy, or a significant strategy, of flipping the classroom as well. People also, there are some folk that how people learn best. Again, if you went through the education department at any university, you will know all of this. But if you didn't, be mindful that how people learn best. Some are auditory, they do need to hear it, and some are tactile, and so they need to experience it. They need it in their hands, for lack of a better term. They need to do it, so they need to hear it. Some people need to do it. Some they need to see it, visual. So as an extension teacher, here's some challenge that we have. If you have an audience of 30 people and you have some, they learn best by hearing it. Others need to read it. Others want to experience it. They're tactile. They need to do this. Others, they need to see it in addition. Then how do you present that to 30 people that all have this different learning styles? Well, the way that we do it is you incorporate all of that. So they get a little bit of everything. And so you're intentional. The philosophical approach that you have is that you value this knowledge that you have. And because you value it, then to be a more effective teacher, you're going to incorporate that into the programs that you present, and being mindful that people learn differently. They absorb it differently. Some, they need that repetition. Others, they read it once and boom, they're good to go. But that's not the case for everyone. So from understanding your learners, be mindful that people learn differently and so forth. So one of the things that I wanted to add here, if people are visual learners and we are teaching via distance in PowerPoint, what might we include to help underscore the learning principles? So you're presenting a PowerPoint, you're teaching via distance. What are some of the things that you might include in that PowerPoint to help underscore the learning principles? Somebody unmute and just shout it out. We're happy to hear from you, or put it in the chat.
Photos.
Photos, absolutely. Okay, I don't know if that was Debbie or not, but anyway, I think it might have been spot on. A picture is worth, you can say it with me, 1,000 words. So in PowerPoint presentations, which quite frankly, I did not do a good job of in this setting, I've not had photos, but if you're doing a PowerPoint presentation and it's on how to, cure fungus on roses, having photos of a rose that's covered in fungi, it's covered in bugs, it's got root rot, it has whatever, you have these photos that you've incorporated. So teaching via distance, that's the way to do it. If you were in person, what might you do? Take a sample. I'm doing this because I'm cutting the rose. I'm going to go into the classroom and I'm going to hold it up and I'm going to say, see, here's how this rosebud is rotting. This is being eaten. This has thrips. This has spider mites, whatever it is. They're seeing it and they're experiencing it and so forth. So very important if you're going to be an effective extension teacher to be mindful of that. So there's some other tips for learner types that we will share with you, again, just to better understand about how people learn and so forth. So we want you to be aware of that. Other realities that you need to be mindful of is that to be an effective extension teacher is that you might have people in the audience that English is not their first language. And while they do speak English, English not being their first language, you may have to take an approach where you're able to maybe explain things a little differently, or to be intentional about trying to explain things and use real world examples, because that might help people to absorb that a little bit differently. Also be mindful that those learning styles to be an effective teacher are going to be important. And you have to incorporate those things. Age spans, you may have an audience that has people that are 16 years old and 80 years old. And so what is the influence of age span? Well, some of it is we could have people that have a lot more practical experience in life and they're bringing all that to the table. And so they may be a bit advanced compared to some of your other audience members. Often when people do parenting education workshops, as an example, we may have people that have teenagers in the audience and we may have people that have infants. And so the people with teenagers, they've lived a whole lot, haven't they? Raising someone to be a teenager. Differences in culture, gender sometimes have influence on our, not just our learning, brain development, different understanding that's a whole other series in and of itself. And then of course, being mindful of literacy levels and so forth is extremely important. The thing I want to leave with before we have a little bit of a breakout time together is that many people who access extension programs, be mindful, they choose to join. They choose to be there. Some of our programs, quite frankly, they are forced to be there. It's a regulatory thing. They have to come to our class to learn about some of the pesticide safety. They have to learn about expanding their food dollar. Maybe they're part of a program where they receive some supplemental support for food purchase, and therefore they come to our program. So sometimes they don't choose to be there. They're there because they have to be. But for others, they choose to be. So be mindful of that Maslow's pyramid and the hierarchy of need. They're there because they want to be. So they're very highly motivated. They're self-directed. Often they're relevancy oriented. They want to know why would I need to know this? What's the relevancy of this? So know your audience and you can adjust yourself accordingly so that they can learn best from the experience. So now we're going to give you a chance to talk among yourselves. So we're going to have a breakout time, and Deb's going to be kind enough to send you into some different rooms. Deb, let's just take maybe about just 5 minutes or so for folk to come out and begin to talk about. You'll be in fairly small groups. So then I hear some of your thoughts. Those of you that were in room 1, just somebody that's willing to speak to some of the strategies that were discussed among the group.
Were we room 1? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think everybody in our group has had a lot of experience teaching in different formats. So we just kind of shared, interactive ways to get students up and moving. And then we started talking a little bit about teaching online and like how it's difficult with not having immediate feedback from the folks that you're teaching. But yeah, generally everybody had some good experience, and just trying to incorporate, hands-on methods and interacting with students as much as possible.
Super.
Students,
yeah.
children and adults.
Yeah, that's fine. And thanks for that. As an extension teacher, one of the things, though, it becomes a little complicated because sometimes then we have to take all that stuff, don't we? We have to take the materials. Sometimes we have to purchase items, food. If we're doing a STEM training or something, we've got to take all the robots. I mean, all of these kind of things. So it becomes a little more complicated, but you have to think through it, think in advance, and how you're going to ready oneself and to get those items to improve the learning environment and so forth. So thanks for that, Claire. Room 2, any thoughts that you all will add? Debbie, maybe you could hop in.
I'm not sure which room we were.
You were 2.
Oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
Well, we all had basically the similar philosophies of do reflect and apply, that we all, whether it's 4-H or we're a new teacher or we're experienced teacher, we all have similar teaching strategies.
Super. And lastly, room 3, anyone to share any strategies that you spoke about to share with the broader group?
Yeah, we were talking about, the importance of using pictures and presentations and also props. When you can bring something to the presentation and people can get a hands on it, it can really make a difference, and they get to feel and interact. And I think it really livens the senses.
Super. That's a great point. All right. Well, thanks everyone. I'm happy that you all had a chance to kind of talk through that, especially kind of the practical thought that some of you have to bring to the table. So let's do this. On my, I don't know, Deb, do I need to reshare the screen? Is that how that's going to?
Yeah, please. Yes.
Okay, is that showing up for us?
Yes.
Okay, well, all of that hullabaloo is just to say next is bio break. So then we'll get rolling again. But let's take 5 minutes. As you think about being an effective teacher, and again, your kind of philosophy of teaching is always being mindful of a few things as well, which is that you have to set the stage for learner readiness. So that means, in short, know your audience. And so do you need to present it as a lecture? Is that the best format based on the topic? Or does it need to be a lab or the practicum that we've been speaking about? In extension, we've often used a historic approach of result demonstrations very successfully in production agriculture in particular, or we do video demonstrations while teaching and so forth. We have decades of success of doing result demonstrations. So the short of that is that quite interestingly enough, to expand on this, this is kind of how 4-H was born, again, to speak to that. But in the early 1900s, we had we knew that hybridized corn seed would yield better, but we couldn't get people to plant that. They wouldn't do it because generationally they'd always used the same kind. They'd used the same production approach, all of that. So we had an educator, an agent, extension agent, who said, well, if I can't teach the old dogs, I'll teach the pups. And so they started a group of kids they brought together, all happened to be boys. And he taught the boys how to use this new production practice and use the hybridized seed corn. And, you know, the visual is there's literally a photo of these kids produce 150 bushels of corn per acre while their father produced 50. And so that result demonstration, I planted it, you saw the yield, is now used to this day. So you go out and people plant these kind of research trial plots. They might plant 10 different varieties of wheat, and then they have a turn row meeting. People come out and they visually see that, and it helps them to take that information in. And because they saw it, they go, wow, that particular variety yielded much stronger. And of course, you know, then there's all the influence of soil and fertilizer, and, you know, all of that type of thing. But anyway, we have drawn on that historically, and that's a time-honored approach for using a demonstration and so forth that is extremely effective. So something to be mindful of. One thing though, to kind of throwback Thursday, notice how I did that, throwback Thursday, last month, I used another example for those of you that are there, what historical teaching approach was highlighted beyond the agricultural result demonstration. Can you remember an example that I used? Just unmute and shout it out. I'll hop in. So what I described is often in nutrition education, we cook the dish in front of them, and we spoke about when I was a county agent, we had a conference room and there was a kitchen at the end and this massive island. It had a mirror over it, and so people could see. And as we were teaching, as we were talking about the new practice, we were doing it. And so that approach, that result demonstration approach, or the method demonstration and so forth, is a time-honored approach, and one that we chatted about last week. It was nice, or last month rather, kind of have that historical perspective and significance. So other tips for being an effective teacher, just to bring a mind to, you know, the size of your room, always keep that in mind. In extension, often we try to use complementary facilities. And so, because we try to keep it at the least cost we possibly can. So sometimes you need to run scout, is a term I use. Go beforehand, see the size of your room. Where's the screen? Where's the audio visual equipment? What are the tables like? You get all of that set up. So to be an effective teacher, you need to know that. Nothing is worse than you had a registration of 30 people problem, and people then won't come again because it was a bad experience. Basics of PowerPoint development, font size, screen size, that's something to learn about. We'll have a LinkedIn learning opportunity that will be part of your onboarding for those of you that are newer to the organization, that you can access about developing effective PowerPoints. And so, you know, often if you even are in a live setting, if you're in a in-person teaching, and the first thing out of your mouth when you put your PowerPoint up, your slide is there. And if you say, I'm sorry, I know you can't see this, that's a problem. Or I'm sorry, I know this is way more information than you can read, that's a problem. And so sometimes it's not intentional. I tell the story about being at a national conference a couple of 3 years ago, and I was tag team teaching with somebody, and we just had the slides I just thought were amazing. And so I was done with my part for a bit. I went to the back of the room, and from the back, I looked at it. I thought, this is horrible. I mean, our background choice of color with the font and the color of the font and all that. I mean, you could barely see it. I was so embarrassed. But anyway, it happens. But be mindful of that. And so again, if you're going, test it. Go show your PowerPoint somewhere, you know, put it up on a screen so that you see what it's going to look like. Social distancing, even in it's less of a mandatory issue for us, but to be an effective teacher, you have to think through that. If I'm going to have capacity that addresses some of this, because even though now we don't have those restrictions, be mindful. Sometimes people don't want to be stacked elbow to elbow. shoulder to shoulder. They don't want to sit like that anymore. And so how does that affect us from a teaching perspective? And how are they learner ready if they're so nervous? If they're in a setting where people are just, stacked in like sardines. And then of course, virtual or in person. So something to just, consider and think about what's a good medium for that particular delivery. So in the chat, I want you to just, here's a poll. Now, because you're virtually teaching, you could use the poll system in Zoom to do this, and you could open it, people could click on what they thought. But today we're just going to use the chat. It's an easy approach. I often do that if I'm the only one teaching, because I can't see the chat when this is all open, and so forth. But if someone's, helping me, then they can just tell me what it says. So that's why we're going to do this. So what grade level should materials be written toward for publication for the average state resident? What grade level should they be targeted to? 6th grade, 7th grade, 10th, or 11th grade? So just in the chat, start to put your thoughts. What grade level? So Deb, will give it just another 2 or 3 seconds. What's the dominant kind of response that's there?
6th grade, 6th grade.
6th grade. So you all are smart as whips. Exactly. So that's a bit of a challenge because you're going to have some folk that may be at a higher level than that. Others not as much so, but this is a reasonable target. This is actually what most typesetters for newsprint media will write at a 6th grade level. Our publications often, depending on the audience, if it's an internal audience of individuals that have a higher level of education, and that going in, that might be written at a higher level. But if it's a general audience, we're just inviting the general public, then it's often best to kind of write at a 6th grade level. So then the next question is, well, what does that look like? How do I write at a 6th grade level and so forth? That's a whole class in and of itself. But fortunately, we have software programs now that you can run your text on, and it'll tell you what that is. So you can access that in LinkedIn Learning. That's another session that we can get to. But to be an effective teacher, that's especially if you're going to use some type of text as part of a handout, something that goes home with people and so forth, then try to write at about a 6th grade level is important. So we're just going to take some time to break out again. I'm going to go ahead and advance to what that topic is. Deb's going to put us into rooms, and then we'll come back together in about 5 minutes, and then we'll kind of wrap up our time here together. But when you break out into your groups, I want you to talk about, some of you have preempted this. I heard you say already when we were talking about strategies for varied learner types, but what strategies might you incorporate for live or online engagement? Share what have worked well for you and what has not. So think about those of you that have already done this and you had to teach things online. What strategies did you incorporate that worked well? And then again, maybe there's something you could share that didn't go so well. Same thing for live in-person teaching, something you tried and you're like, oh, I'm not going to do that again. We can learn as much from that. So Deb's going to send us in, and we'll come back in about 5 minutes. So just click the join up in the right corner of the particular room that you're assigned to, and you'll be taken over there. Certainly welcome to share some things that worked well, but what many of us might learn the most from is what didn't go well. So for those of you willing to speak, you might want to interject that. So so let's hear from room 1. Those of you that might have been in that room. Any thoughts about the strategies that you have drawn on?
The big one was just making sure that we didn't do all the talking, so engaging them, and it could be either verbally or asking questions for them to put into the chat. And the one thing that we discussed about not working well was certain topics that would lead, especially with your youth, that would lead them to want to demonstrate or show you, because then they're going to grab their computer and try to aim the camera, and doesn't always work that well.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Room 2.
I don't know. Were we in room 2? I don't know.
Yes.
Oh, we were. So John and I were talking about how we liked your idea a lot, and I actually was able to utilize it some, of having someone monitor the chat and help with the technology, because sometimes I felt like I was talking about things that maybe the audience was already familiar with. So sometimes having that chat opportunity kind of led us in a different direction and or gave us additional information that was helpful to the group at large. So that was great. And I think for me personally, it sounds like John's really well versed in doing presentations online, but I really can use practice. So I've found that that serves me well to run through a few times and even maybe have someone come into my Zoom room and have me do everything. So I make sure that I'm clicking all the buttons, right?
Yeah, that's great. That's a super point. Yeah, it just gets overwhelming to be able to manage that. So that's a great suggestion. How about our final room? Debbie was able to transition from the room 3 back with Deb and I. So we had a nice visit about some of their Lead Maryland programs. So, but for our final room, any additional thoughts?
We talked about a lot of the same things about kind of technology can be a stumbling block, but can also help you, like using polls, having ways for students to kind of demonstrate comprehension, or at least that they're paying attention or understanding by using polls, and like just kind of letting yourself off the hook when you don't get the same kind of feedback that you do teaching live, and like trying to keep up the momentum and make sure that it's a good presentation overall so that you don't lose folks along the way.
Yeah, fair. People get Zoom fatigue. The other thing is in this, but they can put their camera on, mute the video plus the audio. Yeah, they can go off and make a sandwich. You don't even know that they're gone. And so, there's all of that reality. And then, I think the other challenge is in these types of settings and being able to think in advance of the interaction and so forth is on the other end. We're trying to engage people, but how ready are they from a technology perspective, especially constituent based, that, maybe you're doing a program that's just an all call. Anybody can hop on and, again, I keep using bugs in my lawn. But then if you want them to kind of break out into rooms, are they able to do that? Another thing that I've run into is, interjection of video and so forth is often helpful. But what if the video doesn't play? What if there's not enough bandwidth? I've experienced that many times to the point that I am very reserved about including a video in these types of presentations and so forth. Because again, sometimes it just doesn't run. And especially if you're principling that as a core delivery method, as part of the content. And then if it doesn't work, then you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? So, but people like that. I mean, it's a good way to interject something different, but at minimum, photos and different things, and then changing. Also, it's good to tag team. And I mean, in a perfect world, often in these types of settings, it's good to share, I speak on some of the topic for 10 minutes and then somebody else speaks for 10 minutes and then we can go to someone, so it changes it up. And so that helps, I think, people as well. Just a few things. Well, let me share the screen again, and we're going to kind of wrap up our time here together today.
Jeff, John has a question.
Oh, sorry, John, go ahead. Mhm.
I wanted to make sure we had time to ask this. So you mentioned before you're behind a person that you should be using when you're doing stuff like this. So who is your behind the scenes person for today?
Deb.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Deb and I talked yesterday. Dacia helped to ready, but we spoke among ourselves about our approach, our process, especially with the chat. And then here in a bit, we're going to have some polls and so forth. So that's a great point. So it's one thing to just, say right as you're starting, hey, can you monitor the chat, versus it might take an extra step of having a meeting with somebody to talk through it and have that ready so they kind of understand what's going on. Another thing I did was was to share the PowerPoint ahead of time so that other people besides me had it in case something didn't work right. That's another little strategy that you can use, especially if you have somebody that's, helping behind the scenes. So good point, John. Thanks for asking that. So let's wrap up our next few slides, and we'll then have an opportunity to come together on some of our this aspect about teaching effectiveness and so forth. So being an extension educator, teacher, faculty member, and so forth sometimes can be challenging on a variety of scales, but sometimes we have to teach very complex research-produced information, don't we? So with that said, getting it to the appropriate level for residents to absorb it can sometimes be challenging. And so that, but that's what we do. We take the research-based information, we put it into practical application, and then we teach folks out around the state. So sometimes that's done. We have to take the research report that they did. We have to develop salient points, boil it down into practical layman terms, and then we present it. And so that's what we do. And so then incorporating all these other pieces is something that's quite significant as well. So I appreciate the opportunity for us to focus on it, pardon me, as a collective group. The other thing to come together on that we wanted to speak about is, as you ready to be an effective teacher and to ready for presentations, to ready for the content that you're going to take or that you're going to present, be mindful that as an extension educator, as newer faculty members, that, you know, we don't just Google it. It's very important that as the land-grant university, that we are teaching information based on research in a perfect world that was conducted either at our land-grant university or another land-grant university and so forth. So that is kind of a base, a principle to draw on. You can use extension publications because the extension publications, they've gone through a scholarly rigor. You can draw on journal articles that have been produced by other extension folk. Those have gone through a rigor. There's been external reviewers that have verified the information that's part of that. So as an extension educator, recognize that that's a feeling of confidence that you can have. Further, the curriculum that you use, many of you that here, for instance, in SNAP-Ed, you draw on curriculum that was developed, that was both, you know, financed and developed through the SNAP-Ed program. And so you have a level of confidence as you go forward to teach with that material, because that too, it's been rigorously reviewed and it's been based on research principles and so forth. So to be an effective teacher, extension teacher, make sure that you're drawing on information that is from, there's a rigor that's behind it. So just to underscore, use of extension, land-grant produced curriculum, there's a scholarly rigor with that. It's not always the case, though, that you're going to have some of that available to you. You know, an example, I do a considerable volume of presentations around the nation and am an invited speaker often on diversity and inclusion, more targetedly on supporting LGBTQ plus children and families. We don't particularly do a lot of research on that specific. At University of Maryland, actually we do over in our family science unit. There are individuals that work on that as a topical perspective, but generally within extension, less so. So I often have to find other sources, but those sources they need to be a source that has credibility, there's rigor. An example, I would go to the Human Rights Campaign, GLAAD, these types of groups that they have huge large-scale research rigor behind them that leads to those results, just as an example. But generally, if you default to extension publications curriculum that has a seal of approval, for lack of a better term, that's going to be an ideal setting, and you can feel some confidence in the material that you're presenting. I wanted to underscore about collecting teaching effectiveness, because to be the best teacher you can be is hear from your audience. Now, you can collect evaluation survey data on the content. So the questions we often ask are their change in knowledge, their change in skill, what did they learn? You know, those types of things, very much needed. That's on the content. and the evaluation of the program that you're conducting. And did that lead to outcomes? Did it lead to impact? Was there a change in practice? Did they adopt that practice and so forth? So you can evaluate all of that. But further, to be an effective teacher, you need to intentionally ask your audience about how am I as a teacher? And don't ask your 5 best friends. You know, you need to hear from people that be thick-skinned enough to hear from people to say, you know what, this didn't go well, that didn't go well. Maybe someone is at the back of the room and said, listen, the screen was too small. I couldn't see, I couldn't hear. Okay, all of this above. And so then you can improve the environment and the setting and so forth. But then further, if I'm speaking too fast, talking too slow, whatever it happens to be, we get that feedback, and then that's helpful for us to improve. And then, of course, the comparative component that we spoke to about having the significance of collecting evaluation for content and materials. All of you, any of you as faculty members, whether you're professional track, tenure track, whatever the situation is, you'll need this evaluative data. So as you build a program, and to be an effective teacher, it has to include evaluation and surveys and so forth to make certain that they're learning the content that you're teaching. However you do that, whether it's pen and paper, it's use of Qualtrics surveys, whatever, you'll learn much more about that. In fact, our topic next month is really focused on much of that. So something to be mindful of. So our last slide, just to hone in on, I'm hopeful that we can take, we're actually right up to the end of time. So we're probably just think about among yourselves. I know that as you continue to know each other from a cohort perspective, you can begin to talk about what's going well, what teaching successes you had, and what teachable moments that you had. So that is where I've had the most learning throughout my career, is hearing from others that said, man, you won't believe how badly this went, you know, and so you try things and so forth. So that's important. So build that rapport. This cohort will be amazing for you to mature and grow through your professional career. Some of you have had that for many, many years if you've come in from another group, but others, this might be one of your first professional assignments. And so make sure that you visit regularly with your colleagues and so forth about their successes and what went well. The last thing we'll say in closing before we transition to, I have some statements about teaching effectiveness. Be mindful that actually in a couple of weeks, we're putting on a professional writing focused session. This isn't just for you all from onboarding, it's for the entire organization. Deb has been promoting that. That was based on feedback from the field that they needed or would like that. So that's a wonderful session that will be held, and we'll have some experts that are joining to help advise and counsel. All of you will need to do professional writing, so I'm hopeful that you can register for that. And of course, our next onboarding session that's targeted for you, that's special for you, is April the 6th. That's more on data and needs assessment. Deb will have significant role in taking the lead with that one and so forth. So now we're going to practice collecting some teaching effectiveness. So let me just speak to that briefly, and then Deb will start. I mentioned earlier, and there should be one more slide to just highlight it, but we all have to collect teaching effectiveness. There's an entire site dedicated to this. Administration asks that you collect around 40 to 60 teaching effectiveness ratings on an annual basis from maybe 3 to 5 different sessions. So you have to think through that when you're going to offer teaching effectiveness ratings. Again, this is not your evaluation of their change in knowledge and change in skill, or the outcomes where you might do post follow-ups, all of that. That's needed. This is about your effectiveness as a teacher. That's what teaching effectiveness is. The provost office requires this. It is required of us as faculty members to do this, and you will be asked, this summary will be presented as part of your promotion packet, whether it's for you're going up for promotion under as a professional track faculty member or a tenure track faculty member. That summary of teaching effectiveness will be provided and included. And then, of course, it's part of the annual faculty review process as well. Your program leader will look at this. And so there's a whole site dedicated to it. Here's the link that we'll share with you when they send this out or on UME Answers. So there's even a video that's there on, how to do it and so forth. So you can do that, on your own. It's basically 5 questions that are asked. And at the end of your audience, if you're in live, you can hand out the form and collect that back up. Or if you're teaching like today, we wanted to demonstrate an approach that could be used using the polling system. Because what'll happen at the end, there's 5 questions. And then when you collect that out of Zoom, it'll separate it. And then you'll have those individual pieces that you can use. There's a whole tutorial posted on how to use polling in Zoom to collect teaching effectiveness as well as evaluation data that is up on our UME Answer site as well. Then, of course, you have to take it and go put it into the system. But first, you have to ask the questions. So Deb's kind enough to ask. So this is how you might want to conduct this, and you're going to ask the questions that are teaching effectiveness. So just answer as you will. You will not hurt my feelings while I'm on here. Feel free to answer these as they progress along. So Deb, go ahead. So the first question is, this presenter was effective in communicating the content of the workshop. This would be the same question you ask of people coming. So answer, this is for me. This is, you're rating me. So it was effective in communicating the content of the workshop. So based on your experience today, you can take this poll.
Do I stop the recording, Jeff, or we'll record this one as well?
Yeah, that's fine as well. So I don't know that I'm not seeing much change, Deb. I'm not sure. Oh, okay, it's starting. People are starting to do that. Okay, thanks. So just as I'm doing, if you were presenting and then at the end, you wanted to put this, because you need these for your, to have your teaching effectiveness ratings, you could have this ready-made and then the person that's helping you could present this. So then Deb, the next question, I'm not sure if they're stacked. But the next question down, okay.
Again, yeah.
Oh, people have started to answer. Okay. The presenter was responsive to participants' concerns. The presenter was well prepared for this workshop or program. I learned a lot from this workshop or program. And then the last one is, this presenter was an effective teacher. And so that's really one of the core ones for you, because that's actually the summative statement that would be provided. These others are for your growth and so forth. But the big one that's going to be provided, again, from a promotion aspect and annual faculty review, is this one. They were overall an effective teacher. That's the summative statement. So I do want to answer, somebody answered neutral. So don't always take that as a negative, because it could be people come in with a higher volume of knowledge. And so the things that were presented both today, or if you do a workshop on something that's more at conception, basic and information, and people come with a higher level of knowledge, it could be they didn't particularly learn, but that doesn't mean that you didn't do a good job. It's just that, maybe they came in with a higher level. So we'll end the poll there, and then you would have those data points. I'm going to advance the last slide, which is just our summary of where you can find us in our program and organizational development unit. So whoops, I went ahead. So there's our emails just to follow up. You're hearing a great deal from Deb as we were readying for these. And of course, as Dacia continues forward with this, she'll be very principled in helping to get ready for these and collect registrations and manage it and so forth. So you may be hearing from her more readily as well. But
I think we have a question.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, in the chat. Is there a method to how the replies are listed? I intuitively want to go to the first response for strongly. Oh, sorry. That was about the Michelle. Was that about the poll and how it was done?
It was. I just wanted to go to click strongly agree. My intuition was to go to the top of the list instead of scrolling to the bottom. And I just wonder if anyone else felt that way, if there was some kind of method of how it was constructed.
Right.
Yeah, yes, I can speak to that. So the reality is on the form itself, if you open the form in the teaching effectiveness site, the scale runs from left to right. So
Okay.
it starts, but in this, it stacked it differently. That's a great point. And then we also had some frustrations on our past. I know we're past time, but I didn't want to speak to this. We had some frustrations on our past that the printed form didn't always match. It didn't align with when people went in online to put it in. So sometimes people would have answered strongly agree and they went to put it in the radial buttons and it was strongly disagree.
Right.
So that's been fixed over time. But yeah, it's a great point. So something to think about as you stack that. I like copied them and pay, Deb was kind enough to paste them in. So that's the order. But on the actual form, it runs left to right.
Gotcha. Okay. I just wondered.
Yeah,
I had
no
to
worries.
like make sure I mentally checked it every time.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
no worries.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. Thanks, Deb, for drawing attention to that. That was a good question. I saw John gave that thumbs up too. So, okay, everyone, it was lovely to be with you all. And we look forward to seeing you again next month. And then the next month after that,